What is the key when Christmas is coming to stay focused with all the people and the reunions with friends and family? So, as I said before, we're coming up to the Christmas season, and often it is a time of gatherings and social occasions and social events, and it's easy for the mind to get distracted. There are a few different ways we could talk about this. The first way, and perhaps the simplest way, is that it doesn't matter if the mind gets distracted. It doesn't matter, because the wholeness is always here. And sometimes that wholeness is recognized as being here, and sometimes it's not recognized. And it doesn't matter either way, because whether you remember it or not, or whether you recognize it or not, it doesn't matter. If you already know this, if you already know the wholeness is always here, if you know that for yourself, if you've seen that, and that understanding has taken root in your mind, then you don't need to remember it all the time, because the understanding's there, whether or not you're actively remembering it at a moment in time or not. An example I give is like remembering your name. We all know our name. We all know our name, but we don't have to constantly repeat our name to ourselves all the time. But the knowledge has taken root in our minds. So whenever we need to use that knowledge, the mind can call upon it and use it. The same, if we genuinely know that freedom's already here and that we're completely free, that the essence of who we are is always untouched and unscathed, and our nature, our true nature, is bliss and happiness and eternal peace. And that is always accessible. We might not always remember it. We might not always remember the peace. We might get caught up in the socializing, in the conversation, in the chatter. We might get caught up with society and its ways, but that's okay. So that's the first answer to your question, Edith, that it doesn't matter. However, that answer might not be completely satisfactory, especially if you're suffering a lot. Because if you're suffering, then sometimes the reason we suffer, or pretty much always the reason we suffer, is because we forget this reality. We forget who we are. We forget the truth that is fundamental to our experience and our experience of existence. So if there's a lot of suffering there, then it can be useful to bring yourself out of the mind and come to the present moment and become aware of that aspect of us, that is unchanged, that doesn't undergo any change. And when we're in a social occasion or a social event, it just comes down to coming back to that repeatedly. So when you're having a conversation with someone, just take the time to slow down. Take the time to feel your breathing. Take the time to notice where you are, and take the time to notice what this experience is. Also notice the psychology of the moment, if you can. You don't have to, but sometimes you can realize, oh, in this interaction with someone, there's a psychological motive at play. Maybe you've noticed that you're trying to impress someone, and that can cause suffering. Or maybe you're trying to protect yourself. Maybe you're being defensive in some way, and that can cause suffering. These things both expend energy needlessly. They're inefficient uses of our energy, and they also obstruct a genuine communion with the person we're talking to. Because we're putting a psychological barrier there. So not only do they waste energy, which is a form of suffering, it can tire you out, and it puts a strain on the nervous system and on the physical body that's unnecessary. But it can obstruct that communion, that depth of relationship and connection with somebody else. It can also get in the way of just something very simple and something very important to social interactions, to genuine social interactions, and that's listening. If we're obsessed with the mind and all the chatter, often we don't notice things, and we're not as able and as easily able to listen and to understand the other person who we're with, or the people who we're with. And we're less able to see the dynamic at play, the psychological dynamic, the energetic dynamic, even just the physical dynamic. And that comes through a regular practice, a practice of being, of letting go, of being with who you are. Just being here. Just practicing that. And remember what I said, practice. That word practice might make it sound, I mean, for me, the word practice, as soon as someone says practice it, it makes me feel like, oh gosh, I don't want to do that. That sounds like hard work, or that sounds boring. But practice just means doing something regularly, repeat it repeatedly. And there's nothing nicer than just coming into contact with the essence of who you are, the natural state. It's where our genuine sense of peace and well-being springs up from. But we get, and in brackets for my part, bored of all that superficial energy. So we get bored of all that superficial energy. So I'm guessing you're thinking about, I'm assuming you're talking about the superficial energy of social interaction. Is that correct? The superficial energy of social interaction, some types of social interaction. Maybe some people in your life you can consider to be quite dull or boring. Or maybe they talk about interesting things, but you're just not interested in them. Or maybe it's just superficial chit chat, and who's got time for that? Well, ostensibly here, you have a choice. You don't have to go to the social engagement. You do have a choice. The body-mind has a decision to make about whether it wants to attend. And it can choose to go or not go. And often, the consequences of not going are sort of worse than the consequences of going. So we decide to go. Maybe we'll get hassle from people if we don't attend. So we end up attending. So we make our choice. We make our choices. We think on balance, maybe it's better to end up going to these social events. but we don't have to. Maybe we can face the consequences of not going if we don't want to. That's an option. And then when you're there, well, what's wrong? What's wrong with superficial chat? What's wrong with superficial energy? Notice maybe maybe you have a problem with it. Maybe there's some resistance there. Maybe something about the way people talk annoys you. Or maybe you think we shouldn't waste our time on these things. My suggestion is to be happy, to enjoy it. Enjoy it. If you're enjoying that connection with yourself, then wherever you go, that connection goes with you. And the more you practice it, the more you get in touch with it, the easier it is to get in touch with it when you're in the thick of an event and other energies are around you, dragging you out. So the freedom is already here, fully and completely. So what that means is that nothing is a problem. Even problems are not problems. They're just issues that need to be dealt with. And you're in a room and people are talking about things that don't really interest you, or the energy is very superficial, as you put it. What's wrong with that? That's a part of life. A suggestion is this: when you see people engaging in this maybe superficial type conversation, as you see it, try listening to them. Try listening to them. And not just listen to their words, but listen to their hearts. What's their heart saying? As their mouths are moving and the words are coming out, what's their heart saying? What's going on here at the level of the heart? What's going on here energetically? Some people, when they're talking, the energy is saying, love me, love me, love me, love me, love me, love me. Like me, like me, like me, like me. Or maybe the energy is saying, look at me, notice me, notice me. Or maybe the energy is like, I'm scared, I'm scared, I'm scared. I feel insecure, I feel so insecure. Start to notice what people's hearts are actually saying, what's actually going on. And then what happens is when you realize why people are the way they are, we start to realize that. Two things. First of all, you can see yourself in all these other people. You realize there's no fundamental difference. And second of all, once you start to understand, then compassion. You start to naturally become more compassionate and less judgmental.